At 6:07 on a wet Monday morning in April of 2014, Ada Pike was already dressed, already sitting at the kitchen table, and already looking at the gate. Not the front gate. The small one. 2 leaning cedar posts, a rusted chain, a 9-foot strip of gravel running between the last hayfield and the county blacktop. Most people drove past it for 40 years and saw nothing worth slowing down for. Ada saw the one piece of ground Crown Mesa Holdings had spent 3 decades pretending did not matter. The phone rang again. She let it, not because she was nervous, because her father had taught her that a person who answers on the first ring is already giving something away. The voice on the line was young, smooth, and prepared. "Mrs. Pike, our client is prepared to offer $2.6 million for a clean conveyance of the North Access Lane. 30-day close, cash escrow." Ada looked through the window. The chain on the gate moved slightly in the rain. "That lane is not for sale," she said. The young man stopped breathing for half a second. Ada could hear the mistake happening on the other end. Someone had told him the problem was price. Someone had told him every old farmer had a number. Someone had not told him that Ada Pike had been keeping a notebook beside that gate since she was 12 years old. "Then what exactly are you asking for?" Ada turned the coffee cup once on the table. "Ask your people what the gate is worth after they admit it is mine." Then she hung up. Outside, the rain kept falling on the gravel, and for the first time in 38 years, Ada knew the waiting was nearly over. The first time she saw a man laugh at that gate, she was 8. It was August of 1968, and the county held the land auction in the back room of the Grange Hall because the courthouse air conditioner had failed 2 days earlier. The room smelled like dust, damp paper, and the bitter coffee that sat in a metal urn near the door. Ada sat beside her grandfather, Nolan Pike, with a paper grocery sack folded in her lap. She had drawn a map on it the night before with a carpenter's pencil. The Pike house was a square. The hay meadow was shaded with crooked lines. The old spring was a blue circle. The north gate was 2 small marks where the lane touched the county road. She had written one word beside it: ours. Nolan had seen the map in the truck and said nothing. That was how Nolan approved of things. He let them continue. The auction was supposed to be routine. Several bankrupt farms on the north side of Mason County, a few creek parcels, some cutover timber, nearly 5,000 acres nobody in town believed one company would buy all at once. Then Beck Calder walked in. He arrived late enough for the room to notice and early enough to make sure it did. Gray summer suit, polished shoes, a briefcase so new it still looked embarrassed by the building it was in. Calder owned a development company in Little Rock called Crown Mesa Holdings. Back then, no one in Mason County knew what that meant. They only knew he had money, lawyers, and the kind of smile that made people check whether their own hands were clean. He took the front row. He did not bid like a man buying land. He bid like a man closing a door. Parcel by parcel. The ground around the Pike farm disappeared into his folder. The West Ridge, the creek flat, the timber strip, the long south field that touched the Fair Road. By noon, the Pike place sat in the middle of Crown Mesa's new holdings like a button caught in a coat. During the final break, Calder turned in his chair and saw Ada's map. "What do you have there?" he asked. Nolan did not answer. Ada held the paper tighter. Calder leaned back just enough for the men behind him to see what he was seeing. "A grocery sack survey," he said. A few people laughed because men like Calder made laughter feel safer than silence. Ada felt her face burn. Then Calder pointed at the 2 marks by the road. "That's your grand entrance." More laughter. Nolan leaned down until his mouth was near Ada's ear. His voice was low enough that the room could not steal it. He said one sentence, 7 words. Ada did not understand the whole sentence then, but she understood that it mattered. She opened the grocery sack, found an empty corner, and wrote the words exactly the way he said them. Then she folded that corner inward, tore it along the crease, and put it in the pocket of her dress. She could feel it against her leg for the rest of the day. Calder signed papers for 4,860 acres that afternoon. He walked past Nolan on his way out and tapped the brim of his hat with 2 fingers. "Enjoy your little gate," he said. Nolan watched him leave. Then he took Ada home. After supper, he spread 3 documents on the kitchen table: his 1949 deed, a Yellow County survey, and a notice from the Mason County Road Board that Ada had never seen before. Nolan tapped the notice once, not hard, just enough to make the paper remember. "Pay the assessment every spring," he said, "and keep the posts upright." Ada looked at the grocery sack map, still folded in her pocket. She knew Beck Calder had won everything the room could see. She did not yet know he had missed the only thing that could stop him. What Calder missed was not dramatic. It was 9 feet wide. It had once been part of a farm-to-market road spur planned in 1957, when the county believed it was going to open the North Flats for truck farming and gravel traffic. Surveyors had marked the lane. The county had set 4 iron pins. A right-of-way had been drawn from the blacktop down along the Pike boundary, cutting straight toward the flat acreage beyond. Then the budget moved, not because of a scandal, not because of a fight, because another district had a stronger commissioner, and road money goes where pressure already exists. The spur was canceled in 1960. Most canceled projects die quietly. A folder moves from one cabinet to another. A clerk stamps a page. The land goes back into ordinary weather. But land has to belong to someone. The abandonment notice said the unused right-of-way reverted to the adjoining owner of record. On the day the county gave the lane back, the adjoining owner was Nolan Pike, not Crown Mesa, not the bankrupt farms that would later be auctioned. Nolan Pike. The notice was filed in the road board's abandonment ledger, not the deed book. Different room, different cabinet, different clerk. Crown Mesa's title company checked the deed index. They checked liens, mortgages, easements, tax forfeitures. They did the kind of search that finds what it is trained to find. They did not open the road board ledger. They had no reason to. And because they had no reason to, Beck Calder bought nearly 5,000 acres around the Pike place, without owning the 9-foot throat that connected those acres to the only county road strong enough to carry construction traffic. On paper, it was a sliver. In practice, it was the door, and Nolan Pike had the key in a shoebox behind the flour bin. Nolan died in January of 1976, during an ice storm that made every fence wire on the farm sing. Ada was 16. Her mother had already gone west with a man who sold tractors. Her father had never been part of the house long enough to leave a shape in it. So the farm came down to Ada, her grandmother Ruth, and the shoebox. They opened it 3 nights after the funeral. The kitchen smelled of kerosene because the power was out, and Ruth held the lamp while Ada untied the twine. Inside were tax receipts dating back to 1938. A deed, 2 survey plats, the 1968 auction transfers, 5 letters from the county assessor, and at the bottom, wrapped in wax paper, the abandoned road notice. Ada read it once, then again. Then she read the reversion paragraph out loud, slowly, because the words were plain but the meaning was heavy. Ruth did not interrupt. When Ada finished, Ruth set the lamp closer. "Your granddad kept that separate," she said. Ada looked at the receipts. Every spring assessment, every year marked in pencil, every payment Nolan had made before seed, before feed, before anything else. That was when she understood that Nolan's instruction had never been about tidiness. Pay the assessment. Keep the posts upright. It was a legal defense it's disguised as a chore. For 2 years, Ada did nothing except learn the record. She worked mornings at the feed store, came home in the afternoon, and took the bus to the county library on Thursdays. The librarian, Mrs. Della Horn, learned after the 4th week not to ask what Ada wanted. She simply pulled the road ledgers, the old plat books, and the assessor rolls before Ada arrived. Ada traced every parcel Crown Mesa had bought in 1968. She checked each grantor, each grantee, each boundary note, each canceled easement and survey correction she could find. There was no transfer of the lane, no lien, no quitclaim, no county mistake that would quietly ruin her. Just 9 feet of land the records had returned to Nolan Pike in 1960. In March of 1978, Ada filed a quiet title action at the courthouse. The filing fee was $27. The clerk stamped it without looking at her face. That was the first public move Ada ever made. It did not ask anyone for permission. It simply said what had already been true for 18 years. The lane belonged to Pike land. From that day forward, anyone buying, lending against, or planning around Crown Mesa's property had a problem in the record. Not a secret problem. A visible one. Ada drove home and parked by the north gate. The cedar posts leaned slightly inward as if listening to each other. Beyond them, Crown Mesa's fields ran flat for almost 2 miles. Good ground, wide ground. Ground that could become almost anything if a company could move trucks, concrete, power, water, and buyers in and out. Ada walked the lane from the blacktop to the south pin. 9 feet wide, 412 yards long. Brush on one side, fence wire on the other. At the far end, she turned and looked at Crown Mesa's land. The ridge to the west was too steep for a truck road without blasting. The creek to the east ran through protected bottomland that no sane engineer would promise cheaply. The south line touched county fairground property, and public land has a way of staying where it is. Ada took out Nolan's old notebook and wrote 5 words. There is no second gate. Then she shut the notebook, put it in her coat, and went home to mend a broken hinge on the barn. Waiting is not empty. That is what people who have never had to hold land misunderstand. Waiting has chores. Ada mowed the lane twice a year. April, before the grass hid the pins. October, after the first frost made the weeds brittle. She trimmed the cedar posts, replaced the chain when the old one snapped, painted the top of each iron pin with red barn paint so no survey crew could say it had not seen them. Every spring she paid the assessment in person. The bill was small enough to insult a rich man. $11 in 1979, $14 in 1983, $21 by 1990. But the amount never mattered. The receipt mattered. The county sending it mattered. Ada paying it mattered. A government that taxes a piece of land every year is saying something without intending poetry. It is saying this parcel exists. This owner exists. This claim did not go to sleep. The first offer came in 1981. A man named Jerry Lusk arrived in a brown sedan with a folder tucked under his arm and shoes too clean for March. He offered $12,000. He called the lane non-productive. He called the closing simple. He called Ada reasonable before he had any evidence for it. Ada thanked him for the drive and closed the door. Then she wrote everything in the notebook: name, time, offer, plate number. The exact phrase, non-productive strip. The fact that he looked at the gate before he looked at the house. 3 weeks later, she saw survey flags on Crown Mesa's side of the south pin. The flags were orange. The truck was from a civil engineering firm in Little Rock. She wrote that down, too. In 1988, the county economic office called. The man said there was interest in regional job creation. He said the county hoped to facilitate infrastructure cooperation. He said willing landowners could benefit from being part of the future. Ada listened until he ran out of words that did not mean pressure. Then she asked him who had requested the call. He said that information was not immediately in front of him. Ada thanked him and hung up. That afternoon, she called Della Horne's nephew, who had become a title researcher in Springfield, and asked him to pull every planning application filed on Crown Mesa's north acreage. The answer came back in pieces: a proposed quarry access study, a rail transload feasibility memo, a resort application that died before zoning. Then, in 1996, a larger plan under a different company name, Ozark Gateway Partners. Ada traced the registered agent. Same law firm, same address, same Crown Mesa money. By then, Beck Calder had stepped away from daily operations, but his company had learned to wear masks. Ada clipped each filing and put it in a manila folder behind the shoebox. The folder thickened slowly. That was how proof grows when nobody is watching. Not in one thunderclap, in paper, in dates, in the boring accumulation of things a careless person calls clutter, right up until a judge calls them evidence. Mara was Ada's niece, not her daughter. But from the age of 10, she spent more nights at Ada's house than anywhere else, because her own house changed temperature depending on who had been drinking. Ada never made speeches about it. She simply kept a bed made in the small room off the pantry and acted as if the girl had always belonged there. The first time Mara came on the spring lane check, she was 11. Ada handed her the red paint can and said, "Don't spill it." That was the entire invitation. They walked the lane together. Ada checked each pin with her thumb, the same way Nolan had checked fence staples, feeling for movement before trusting her eyes. Mara watched. At the south pin, she asked, "Why do you paint them if you already know where they are?" Ada wiped dirt from the iron with the edge of her glove. Because knowing is not the same as proving. Mara thought about that for a while. The next October, she brought her own notebook, a cheap blue one from school. She did not ask permission to use it. Ada did not give any. They wrote the entries side by side on the tailgate of the truck. Date, weather, pin condition, mow complete, no disturbance. Ada understood, without needing to say it, that the lane had found its next witness. Years later, Mara became a property lawyer in Fayetteville. People told Ada that must have made her proud. Ada said it made sense. There is a difference. By 2002, Crown Mesa had stopped pretending the north acreage was farmland. Survey crews came in larger trucks. County planners used longer words. The documents changed from possibilities to phases. Distribution park, cold storage, rail-adjacent logistics, industrial water service, traffic impact. The project finally had a shape, and every version of that shape needed the North Gate. In July of 2003, a lawyer named Paul Vesper came to Ada's kitchen in a linen suit that did not survive the humidity. He placed a folder on the table and offered $480,000. He said Crown Mesa wanted to resolve a title irregularity. Ada let that phrase hang in the kitchen. Title irregularity, as if the lane had coughed at an inconvenient time. Vesper explained that development at that scale brought complications to neighboring agricultural properties: traffic, noise, construction pressure, potential condemnation discussion if public benefit became a county priority. He never threatened. That was his skill. He arranged facts in the shape of a threat and asked her to admire the arrangement. Ada did not open the folder. She asked one question: "Is that your best number, or the first number you were allowed to say?" Vesper's face changed just enough. "It is a fair number." "Then keep it," Ada said. He left with the folder. That evening, Ada wrote his words in quotation marks. Title irregularity, public benefit, fair number. Below them, she added one sentence: They are close enough to be afraid of time. The real attack came 3 years later. Mara found it first. A motion filed by Crown Mesa in county court, arguing that the North Lane had been abandoned. Their theory was clean. The road had never been built. No public traffic had used it. The original purpose of the right-of-way had lapsed. Therefore, the lane should merge into the surrounding Crown Mesa tract. It was not a foolish argument. That made it more dangerous. Bad lawyers make noise. Good lawyers look for a sentence nobody defended. Mara faxed the motion to Ada, then drove down the next morning with 2 boxes of case law, and the kind of anger that makes a person speak softly. Ada put coffee on. They sat at the kitchen table with the shoebox between them. Mara read the motion twice. Then she reached for the assessment receipts. There were 68 of them by then. Nolan's handwriting for the early years, Ada's for the rest. 68 consecutive spring payments. 68 county acknowledgments. 68 little refusals to let the lane disappear. Mara held the stack in both hands. They argued abandonment against a parcel the county has billed every year since before the road was canceled, she said. Ada nodded. Their mistake is not the law, Mara said. It's the facts. Ada poured more coffee. That was all she needed to hear. The hearing was delayed for 8 years. County docket changes, continuances, settlement talks that went nowhere, a recession that froze Crown Mesa's financing. A new investor group, a new project name, Prairie Gate Commerce Park. Ada disliked the name immediately, not because it was false, because it was almost true. By 2014, Crown Mesa had cleared its financing, signed a rail service agreement, secured tax incentives, and spent enough preliminary money that walking away would embarrass everyone who had approved anything. Then the first call came. $2.6 million. Ada said no. 2 days later, the second call came from someone older. $3.1 million. Ada said no. Then Mara came home. She arrived before dark with a rolling case, a legal pad, and the blue notebook she had kept since she was 12. Ada had forgotten it was blue. Mara had not. They spread the records across the kitchen table. Abandonment notice, quiet title filing, assessment receipts, maintenance notebooks, photographs of the pins, letters from the county, copies of every offer. Mara arranged them not by memory but by weight. First, the document that created the ownership. Second, the filing that announced it. Third, the receipts that proved it never slept. Fourth, the notebooks that proved Ada had treated the lane like owned land for nearly 4 decades. Ada watched her niece build the argument. There are moments when you see that something you carried has become lighter because someone else has picked up the other end. Mara looked at the final notebook entry. April 7th, 2014. Spring mow complete. All 4 pins visible. North chain replaced. First offer received. Not a sale. Mara read the last 3 words again. Not a sale. Ada looked out the window at the gate. No, what do you want? That answer had been ready for longer than Mara had been alive. A permanent access easement over the lane. $6,100 a month. Adjustment every 3 years tied to inflation. Secured against Crown Mesa's title, so the obligation followed the land, not the company. Transferable to Ada's heirs or trust. No buyout option. No forced conversion to a lump sum. No language that made the lane sound like Crown Mesa's property. Mara wrote it all down. Then she looked at her aunt. They will call it unreasonable. They bought 5,000 acres around a 9-foot gate, Ada said. They can explain reasonable to themselves. Mara almost smiled. Almost. The hearing took place on a Thursday morning in May, in a windowless county meeting room that had once been a storage office. The fluorescent lights hummed. The folding chairs clicked when people shifted. Someone had made coffee no one wanted. Crown Mesa sent 3 lawyers. Ada brought Mara the shoebox and the red paint can. Mara had not asked about the paint can. Ada set it on the table beside the receipts. The senior lawyer for Crown Mesa gave a careful presentation. He spoke about dormant use, original purpose, merger doctrine, public policy. He used enough law to make the argument respectable. Mara let him finish. Then she placed the first receipt in front of the hearing officer. 1938. Then the next, 1939. Then the next, 1940. She did not stack all 68 dramatically. She did something better. She made the room wait through the pattern, year after year, spring after spring, payment after payment. When she reached 2014, the hearing officer leaned back. He looked at Crown Mesa's lawyers. The county billed this parcel separately every year. Yes, Mara said. And the Pike family paid every year. Yes. And the county accepted every payment? Yes. He tapped the stack once. That is not abandonment. That is the opposite of abandonment. The ruling took 13 minutes from opening statement to finish. Crown Mesa lost. One of their lawyers was on the phone before he reached the hallway. Ada carried the paint can back to the truck. Mara asked why she had brought it. Ada put it on the floorboard. Wanted the room to see maintenance had a color. The negotiation began before supper. Crown Mesa offered $3.8 million. Mara refused. They offered $4.4. Mara refused. They offered $5 million and said it would be the cleanest outcome for everyone. Mara said clean was not the same as acceptable. On the third day, Paul Vesper himself called. He had lost the linen suit years ago. His voice had lost some of its polish, too. He asked whether Mrs. Pike understood the complexity of administering a perpetual payment structure. Mara looked across the table. Ada was shelling peas into a bowl as if no sentence on earth could hurry her. My client understands complexity, Mara said. Your client just spent 46 years not understanding a gate. Vesper went quiet. Mara did not help him. That was one of Ada's favorite things about her. She could leave silence alone. At 4:22 that afternoon, Crown Mesa accepted $6,100 a month. Inflation adjustment every 3 years, secured against the property, transferable to the Pike Trust. No buyout, no ownership transfer. The lane remained Ada's. There was one condition, a confidentiality clause about negotiation details. Ada waved one hand. Let them keep their pride, she said. The easement was signed at the courthouse on the last Friday of May. 3 copies. 2 notaries. One county recorder who remembered Nolan Pike because Nolan had once fixed the hinge on the records room door without sending an invoice. She looked at Ada over the stamp. You're Nolan's girl. Ada signed the final page. Still am. Outside, the sky had cleared after morning rain. Mara stood beside her on the courthouse steps, holding the recorded copy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, because some victories are too old for celebration. Mara finally said, he knew. Ada knew who she meant. Yes, all the way back. Ada looked toward the street, where traffic moved past without noticing anything had changed. He knew enough to wait. That evening, Ada sat in her truck by the north gate before going home. The recorded easement was in the seat beside her. The old notebook was in her lap. She wrote the date, easement signed. $6,100 due, first of each month. Gate still ours. Then she reached into the glove box and took out the folded grocery sack corner she had kept since 1968. The paper was soft at the creases. The pencil had faded, but the words were still there. 7 words in the uneven hand of an 8-year-old trying to make a sentence permanent. Keep the gate. Rent them the crossing. Ada held the paper against the steering wheel. She could hear the Grange Hall again. The laughter. The metal coffee urn. Beck called her telling a child to enjoy her little gate. She understood now why Nolan had not answered him. A man who knows the value of silence does not spend it defending a thing that time will defend better. The first payment arrived on July 1, a standard corporate envelope, a printed check, $6,100 exactly. Ada brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Rain tapped lightly against the window. Mara was there that morning, sitting where Nolan used to sit, reading through a lease for another client who owned less land and had more fear. Ada opened the notebook. First payment received. Amount correct. Gate closed after mail. Mara looked up. That's all you're writing? Ada looked at the check. A lump sum would have made noise once. This would arrive quietly every month, long after the men who called it unreasonable had retired, restructured, or died. One check could be spent. A gate that stayed owned could keep earning. That was the part Beck Calder had never understood. He thought ownership meant taking the map. Nolan understood ownership meant keeping the narrow place everybody else would one day need to cross. Ada slid the check toward Mara. Deposit for the trust. Mara nodded. Outside, the chain on the north gate moved in the wind. The posts still leaned slightly inward. The red paint on the pins was fresh. The gravel was wet, ordinary, and exactly where it had always been. People had offered millions for that lane because they believed money could turn a gate into a sale. Ada Pike had spent her life proving the opposite. The gate stayed, and because it stayed, everything else had to pay to pass.